Okay, never again will we ever see a gun show in California ever again, or are they completely gone for forever? Well, there was a major setback. Unfortunately, in the courtroom, there was a major setback. So what happened? Let's talk about the history a little bit. First off, gun shows, the most appropriate place for them to take place is on fairgrounds. Fairgrounds are owned and run by the state of California. So, and that just makes the most amount of sense. They have the most room for a gun show. They have the most parking. There are very few, if any, private venues that can handle a gun show the way a fairgrounds can handle a gun show. And oh, by the way, that's the whole purpose of a fairgrounds. It's a regional asset. It's something that they can have all kinds of different shows, all kinds of different assemblies there. That's exactly what it's for. It's owned by the taxpayer. So for years, for decades, it was a perfect marriage. They would have gun shows. People would show up. There was fellowship. It was First Amendment. It was Second Amendment. It was wonderful. The safety record was impeccable. Studies actually show that gun shows bring down crime. They don't increase crime. And of course, at a gun show, you have to comply with all state laws, all federal laws. This myth of a gun show loophole didn't exist. So what happened? Well, a bunch of anti-gun politicians decided that they were going to outlaw gun shows on state property. And they, got a bunch of activists to show up and tell a bunch of lies, frankly, to, talk about gun shows as if they were dangerous or as if there was a ton of illegal activity. And it passed. Just like all these anti-gun laws in California, it passed, unfortunately. So what happened? Well, they sued. B&L Productions, which is Crossroads of the West. Their attorneys sued. Unfortunately, lost, and they appealed and appealed and appealed. Finally, it was ready for the Supreme Court to take a look. Well, we found out last week that the Supreme Court of the United States decided to not take the case. They decided to not take the case, which means that the last ruling stands. The last ruling was that the state could not allow gun shows on state property if they so choose. Now, we've had gun shows that were on private property, private land. It's very difficult. These private venues, it's much, much, much more difficult to have them on private property than it is on these public venues, because for all the reasons, all the reasons I stated: the size, the parking, the accommodations, and the price. Frankly, the fairgrounds are supported by your tax dollar, and the private venues are not. So there's an unfair advantage there, right? But it benefited gun owners. We're paying our taxes so that we could have things like gun shows on these fairgrounds. Now, it doesn't stop Del Mar. They said, well, gee, the gun shows are dangerous and we shouldn't be promoting this type of activity and behavior, and think of the children and think of the children and think of the children. It doesn't stop Del Mar from having, these drunken, fests and, music performances that promote violence and have actually had shootings. They still have those at their venue, but they decided that no matter how safe and, a gun show is, and no matter how much gun safety they teach, and no matter how much training that goes on there, no matter how impeccable their safety record is at a gun show, they're still going to outlaw them because they're a bunch of hypocrites, and that's horrible. So what I wanted to emphasize, so as of right now, none of these venues that are owned by the state can have gun shows. The law stands. The injunction that was on it is done. So Del Mar, Orange County, all these different places where they were using state-funded venues, they no longer can have them there. And I wanted to talk about, well, now what? Is it over? The Supreme Court refused to take it. So now what? And what does that mean? It means, can we get this changed? Yeah, we can get it changed, but it's a long road. It would require us getting a majority in the Assembly, getting a majority in the state Senate, and then getting a governor that would actually sign it into law. Because it was a law passed by an Assembly member, then we'd have to actually have it undone by the legislature. And when I say majority, I'm talking about a majority of people that are reasonable and rational when it comes to gun rights. I'm not necessarily talking about a majority Republican or majority Democrat. I'm talking about people that can put their emotions aside, put their political bias aside, decide that they don't want to abuse their power and they don't want to take things away from Californians, that they want to do what government's supposed to do, which is protect their ability to assemble, protect their ability to keep and bear arms. And we could get that undone. But the other point I really wanted to make is I think a lot of people just think that, hey, all this is going to get solved in the courts. And it's just not. There are, frankly, a lot of laws that won't be found unconstitutional in a courtroom that will limit your Second Amendment freedoms. Does that mean they're not unconstitutional? They probably are. You know, you and I probably agree that all these laws are unconstitutional when it comes to limiting your ability to keep and bear arms. But listen to what I said. What I said was there are going to be a number of laws that limit your ability to keep and bear arms that won't be found unconstitutional by the courts. They should be, but I'm saying they won't be. It's not the only solution, and frankly, it's the solution that we have the least amount of control over. You know, unless you're the attorney who's filing the case or you're a plaintiff, the only thing really left for you to do is write a check, which you should do. All these groups that are filing lawsuits and supporting these cases, they absolutely are necessary, and we need to support them with our dollar. But then after you write that check, you know, there's if you take a day and write a check and put a stamp on it and send it into a group or whatever, okay, well, there's 364 other days of the year where there's a lot of activism that needs to happen. And the reality is these laws wouldn't have passed had we gotten the right person elected in the first place. The person who wrote the assembly bill that banned gun shows specifically from the property in Del Mar is currently the mayor of San Diego. It's Todd Gloria. And by the way, on his social media, he was bragging about this. You know, this was an accomplishment. Hey, guys, remember how I infringed on your First Amendment rights and I'm infringing on your Second Amendment rights, and I demonized you for being a gun owner and said that you're a problem and that you're dangerous? Remember when I did that? Well, the Supreme Court agrees with me now, which isn't quite accurate, by the way. They just refuse to hear the case. But all these folks start out on a local border council somewhere, and they can be stopped before this happens, or we can elect people to replace the people who and undo these problems. That's a very real possibility. In fact, that's exactly how America is supposed to work. The courts are supposed to be a very last line of defense in extreme situations where there is a true and sincere disagreement. So I'm encouraging you, get involved. Get involved with us. Get involved with another Second Amendment group. Doesn't matter. Just get involved. There's a lot of strength with getting involved with a group. You know, if you're just an individual and you're trying to talk to folks, you know, frankly, elected officials just don't have enough time to listen to each and every individual in their district. So the more that they can talk to a group, you know, and be more efficient, and know that, hey, you represent 1,000 people, you represent 10,000 people, whatever it is, the more effective you can be. So, you know, write the emails, do the Facebook posts, make the phone calls, whatever. But just know that the most effective thing you can do is join a group and raise people and money. You know, organize people to get involved and raise money so that we can get all the things done that we need to get done. So I wanted to bring that up. It's unfortunate. We're still looking at gun shows. We had a gun show in Escondido not too long ago. We've had talks about having it again. So I don't think it's the end of gun shows, but the reality is that, you know, not only is the fairgrounds, you know, being withheld from you as a Californian, but it's also their opportunity, like Todd Gloria is using it for, to paint you as a horrible, evil, you know, problem. And I think that is probably if not where it's just as bad as the reality of not being able to use the fairgrounds, is them using it as a PR move. So I wanted to tell you about that unfortunate case. And we don't know why. We don't know why the Supreme Court didn't take it. You know, I got to tell you, the folks on the Supreme Court, the folks that work for the Supreme Court justices are extremely intelligent people. And there are reasons, I should say, that they didn't take this case that we can't even think of. You know, they might be looking at this case from a whole different angle. You know, it may impact something that we never even would have imagined. Or maybe they just didn't want to take the case. We don't know. But the reality is they don't take thousands of cases every single year, which is another reason we can't just rely on court cases. So that's unfortunate. What do you think about that, Alicia?
It's unfortunate, but to be honest, I'm not overly surprised.
Really? Why do you say that? What doesn't surprise you about it?
Lately, lately the Supreme Court's been generally kind of kicking back a lot of cases back to the district and lower courts and asking them to review. They're not. It doesn't seem like they're really going hands on and seeing a lot of these firearms cases, or at least not that I'm seeing, unless you know something different.
No, I mean,
it seems like they're pushing them back.
They don't. I think that I think that you're absolutely right. It's totally accurate. I've heard a lot of people complain about it. I think, though, that we're looking at it from one angle, you know, like that's what's important to us is this Second Amendment stuff. Right. It needs to get solved. But the reality is, like I said, there are thousands of cases that they don't take.
Right.
You know, and between, let's see, Heller was 2008. And before that, there was a Miller case, not the assault weapons ban case, but there was another Miller case in the 30s, the late 30s. So, you know, what is that, 70, 80 years or whatever? For 80 years, they didn't take any Second Amendment cases.
Right, right.
So if you look at it historically and if you compare it to other cases, you know, it's kind of surprising that they've taken so many Second Amendment cases in the last 15, 16, 17 years, whatever it is. I wish they'd take them all. But to be realistic, the reality of this situation is it's the Supreme Court. Everybody wants them to take their case, and they have to pick or choose. But like I said, I don't know. Maybe they looked at this case and said, "Hey, there are some personal property issues, or some business issues that would be impacted by this that have nothing to do with the Second Amendment." And we can't take this particular case, even if we want to make this point, because it'll impact other things. I don't know. I'm totally making this up and speculating. But what I'm saying is there's an entire staff of extremely intelligent people who look at these things from all kinds of different angles and strategize and try to figure out, hey, is this the right case? Yes, the majority of the Supreme Court thinks that the state's out of line. But if we take this case and rule on it, it could backfire in these 5 different ways. It have nothing to do with the Second Amendment. It's a very distinct possibility. Or they just don't have enough time.
Could be.
They just got to pick and choose. But I agree. I wish they would. I wish they'd take more cases. Hey, thanks for watching Gun Owners Radio. I hope you loved that clip. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and follow us on social media. And check out our website at gunownersradio.com.